The rain had barely dried on my clothes when I stood on my own son's porch, suitcase in hand, shivering not from the cold but from heartbreak. My house, the home where I'd raised him, where I'd kissed his scraped knees and celebrated his graduations, had been torn apart by the storm. Everything I had built with decades of sacrifice swept away overnight. When the door opened, hope flickered inside. Me. I thought Daniel, my only child, would see his mother's desperation and pull me into safety. Instead, he didn't even let me pass the threshold. Some wounds cut deeper than any storm ever could, and some betrayals, I would learn, become the unexpected doorway to second chances. I always believed that motherhood was about sacrifice. For 30 years, that's what I lived by. Missing vacations, skipping doctor's appointments, eating ramen noodles so Daniel could have new shoes for basketball. My husband Tom died when Daniel was only 4, leaving me with a mortgage, a preschooler, and grief so heavy I sometimes couldn't breathe. But I did what mothers do. I kept going. Our modest split level in the suburbs of Indianapolis wasn't much, but it was ours. I painted the walls myself, planted perennials that bloomed every spring without fail, and worked double shifts as a secretary at Parker & Associates law firm to keep us afloat. My social life consisted of Daniel's parent-teacher conferences and the occasional coffee with Susan from accounting. Dating? That luxury belonged to women who had time, energy, and hearts that weren't already completely occupied. "Mom, you don't have to come to every game," Daniel would say in high school, his embarrassment palpable as I cheered too loudly from the bleachers. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I'd reply, pretending not to notice how he'd edge away when his friends approached. I watched him grow from a gap-toothed boy who needed me to cut his meat into a handsome young man who needed me less and less. When he got accepted to Indiana University, I cashed out my meager retirement fund to cover his tuition. When he graduated and landed his first accounting job, I framed his diploma and hung it in our living room, right next to the last family photo taken before Tom died. "You're embarrassing," he'd say, but I'd catch the ghost of a smile sometimes. When Daniel met Lauren Pierce 3 years ago, I knew immediately that something had shifted. She was beautiful in that polished, intentional way. Designer clothes, perfect makeup, the kind of confidence that came from never having to wonder if you belonged somewhere. At Sunday dinners, she'd subtly touch the chipped plates or eye the worn couch, her disapproval silent but unmistakable. "Linda," she'd say, always using my first name despite being 20 years my junior, "have you ever thought about updating your style?" She'd gesture vaguely at my department store clothes, the practical bob I'd worn since Daniel was in middle school. "Mom's fine just the way she is," Daniel used to say, back when he still remembered to defend me. But that was before Lauren's influence had fully taken hold, before his visits became shorter and his calls more infrequent. Last Christmas, they announced they were moving in together. Daniel found a place on the north side of Indianapolis, a new development with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. When they gave me a tour, Lauren kept saying, "We wanted something modern," her eyes sliding meaningfully to my outdated home. "It's beautiful," I said, swallowing the hurt. "I'm happy for you both." I missed him fiercely in the months that followed, my house echoing with a new kind of emptiness. But I kept busy. I volunteered at the library on weekends, joined a book club at church, planted more flowers. I told myself this was normal. Children grow up, they build their own lives. My sacrifices had worked. Daniel was successful, independent. Isn't that what mothers want? Then the storm came. Meteorologists had been tracking it for days, but no one expected it to intensify so dramatically. I was at work when the tornado warning sirens began to wail. The sky turned an eerie green-black, and we all huddled in the windowless file room as the building shuddered around us. When it was finally safe to leave, the streets were unrecognizable. Trees uprooted, power lines down, debris everywhere. My neighborhood had taken a direct hit. As I turned onto my street, my stomach dropped. Where my house should have been stood a partial structure, the roof gone, walls exposed like an architectural cross-section, 30 years of memories open to the sky. The Red Cross volunteers found me sitting in what remained of my living room, clutching a water-damaged photo album. They offered me a cot at the top emergency shelter set up at the high school gym, but I couldn't bear the thought of sleeping there, surrounded by strangers. Instead, I salvaged what I could, some clothes, important documents, the few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to my mother, and stuffed them into a suitcase. "Do you have somewhere to go, ma'am?" a kind-faced volunteer asked, handing me a bottle of water. "Yes," I lied, because saying the truth out loud, that I had nowhere and no one. Felt too much like admitting defeat. My son. I called Daniel from my car, the rain still coming down in sheets. The house is gone, I said, my voice breaking. I need to come stay with you. Just for a little while until the insurance. Mom, he cut me off, his voice tight. This really isn't a good time. Lauren and we're kind of in the middle of something. Daniel, I have nowhere to go, I said, disbelief making my words sound distant and strange. My house is destroyed. Everything is gone. There was muffled talking on his end, and I could hear Lauren's voice, though not her words. Then Daniel sighed. Fine, but just for tonight. We'll figure something out tomorrow. Relief washed over me. Of course he wouldn't. Turn me away. He was my son, my baby. Despite his initial hesitation, blood was thicker than water. Lauren would understand once she saw my situation. I drove through flooded streets to their upscale neighborhood, untouched by the storm's path. Their townhouse stood pristine against the darkening sky, windows glowing with warm light. I parked and grabbed my suitcase, suddenly conscious of my disheveled appearance. Clothes wrinkled and damp, hair plastered to my face, eyes red from crying. As I approached their front door, I practiced my smile, not wanting to seem too needy or desperate. Daniel would help me. He was a good boy at heart, despite his recent distance. This crisis would remind him of what really mattered. Family. I rang the doorbell and waited, hope rising in my chest for the first time since the sirens had sounded. That's when everything I thought I knew about my son, and my life, changed forever. The door swung open, and there stood Daniel, his expression a mixture of annoyance and embarrassment. Behind him, Lauren leaned against the hallway wall, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Neither moved to let me in. Mom, Daniel said, his voice clipped. I told you. We'd figure something out tomorrow. I know, but I gestured helplessly at my suitcase, at my still damp clothes. I don't have anywhere else to go tonight. Lauren stepped forward then, placing a hand possessively on Daniel's arm. We're actually hosting a dinner party this weekend for Daniel's boss, she said, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes cold. We've been preparing the guest room, and it's just not available right now. I blinked, struggling to comprehend. I could sleep on the couch, I offered, my voice small. I won't be in the way, I promise. Daniel's jaw tightened. Mom, we need our privacy. Lauren doesn't want you here. It would complicate things. The words hit me like physical blows. My knees nearly gave way as I stood there, rejected on the doorstep by my own flesh and blood. Through the windows of neighboring houses, I could see people watching, curious faces peering out at the unfolding drama. The humiliation burned hotter than my grief. I raised you, I whispered, my voice breaking. I gave you everything. Something flickered in Daniel's eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or a shadow of the boy I once knew. But then Lauren squeezed his arm and his expression hardened. Again. There's a Holiday Inn about 10 minutes from here, he said, pulling out his wallet. He extended 3 crisp $20 bills. This should cover tonight. We can talk tomorrow about more permanent arrangements. I stared at the money, unable to move. Was this what 30 years of motherhood was worth? $60 and a dismissal? I don't want your money, I said finally, finding a shred of dignity somewhere deep inside. I want my son. Lauren sighed theatrically. Daniel, we're going to be late for our reservation. Mom, please, Daniel said, not meeting my eyes. Take the money. Go to the hotel. We'll call you tomorrow. Before I could respond, the door closed gently but firmly in my face. I stood there for what felt like hours, rain beginning to fall again, mingling, with the tears on my cheeks. Through the door, I could hear their muffled voices, Lauren's irritated tone, Daniel's placating response, then the sound of keys jingling and a back door opening and closing. They were leaving, going to their dinner reservation, leaving me standing on their porch with nowhere to go. I don't remember walking back to my car. I don't remember driving aimlessly through unfamiliar streets, windshield wipers beating a rhythm that matched my racing heart. I ended up in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, engine off, staring at nothing. Inside my purse, my phone buzzed. For a wild moment, I thought it might be Daniel coming to his senses. But it was Susan from work, checking if I was okay after the storm. I didn't answer. How could I explain what had just happened? How could I put into words that my entire life, the sacrifices, the love, the certainty that I was building something that mattered, had been an illusion? I pulled down the sun visor and looked at myself in the small mirror. 50 years old, lines around my eyes, gray roots showing beneath my drugstore dye job. When had I become someone so easy to discard? As I sat there, memories washed over me. Like the rain outside, not of Daniel, but of someone else. Someone from a lifetime ago. Christopher Hale, my high school sweetheart, the boy with the crooked smile who'd promised me the world under the bleachers after a football game in 1991. No matter where life takes me, I'll never let you stand alone, he'd whispered, his breath warm against my ear. I'd loved him fiercely, completely, the way only a 17-year-old girl can love. But then life intervened. I got pregnant with Daniel. Christopher had just been accepted to a prestigious business program in Chicago. He wanted me to come with him, to get married, to build a life together. But I was scared. My parents were devastated about the pregnancy, and Thomas, Daniel's father, offered stability, respectability, a solution to my problem. I chose the safer path. Christopher left for Chicago alone, his heart broken. Thomas and I married quickly, quietly, and though Thomas had been a good man, kind, responsible, I sometimes caught myself wondering what my life might have been like if I'd been brave enough to follow my heart instead of my fear. Over the years, I'd heard whispers about Christopher. He'd built a successful tech company, become wealthy beyond imagination. Occasionally, his name would appear in the business section of the Indianapolis Star. Each time, I'd run my fingers over the newsprint, wondering if he ever thought of me. Now, sitting in my car with rain drumming on the roof, I realized I had nothing left to lose. My house was gone. My son had rejected me. My dignity lay in tatters. What would it matter if one more person from my past turned me away? With trembling fingers, I pulled out my phone and searched his name. Christopher Hale, CEO of Hale Innovations. The company website listed a contact number for his Indianapolis office. He had returned to our hometown after all these years. Before I could lose my courage, I dialed. 1 ring, 2, 3. I was about to hang up when a deep voice answered. Hale speaking. My heart stopped. After 30 years, I would have recognized that voice anywhere. Chris, I whispered. It's Linda. Linda Carrington. A pause during which I held my breath. You probably don't remember me, but... Linda? His voice softened immediately. Of course I remember you. What's wrong? You sound upset. The simple kindness in his tone broke something open. Inside me. Before I could stop myself, I was telling him everything. The storm, my house, Daniel's rejection. 30 years of distance collapsed like they were nothing. Where are you right now? He asked when I finally fell silent. I looked around, noticing for the first time the name of the diner. Moonlight Cafe on Meridian Street. Stay there, he said firmly. I'm coming to get you. Chris. No, I didn't call to... Linda, he interrupted gently. I made you a promise once. I intend to keep it. The line went dead. I sat in my car, stunned. Had that really just happened? Was Christopher Hale, successful businessman, millionaire, really coming to rescue the woman who had broken his heart 3 decades ago? I didn't believe it until 40 minutes later, a sleek black Mercedes pulled into the parking lot, its headlights cutting through the rain. The driver's door opened, and a tall figure emerged, holding an umbrella. Even after 30 years, I recognized him instantly. Christopher Hale stood before me, time having sculpted the boy I'd once loved into a distinguished man. Rain glistened on his tailored charcoal suit. His dark hair was now threaded with silver at the temples, but his eyes, those eyes that had once looked at me with such youthful adoration, still held the same warmth, now deepened by years of experience. Linda, he said simply, and that one word carried 3 decades of unspoken history. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Shame washed over me. Shame for my disheveled appearance, for my desperation, for calling him after all these years only because I had nowhere else to turn. I'm sorry, I finally managed, my voice barely audible above the rain. I shouldn't have called. This was a mistake. Christopher stepped closer, sheltering me with his umbrella. The only mistake, he said gently, would be if you hadn't called. He opened the passenger door of his Mercedes, and despite my hesitation, I found myself sliding into the leather seat. The car smelled of expensive cologne and new leather. As Christopher walked around to the driver's side, I caught a glimpse of myself in the side mirror. Hair plastered to my face, mascara smudged beneath my eyes. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman who had lost everything. Where are we going? I asked as he started the engine. I have a penthouse downtown, he replied. Guest room with a private bath. It's yours for as long as you need it. Chris, I can't accept that. We haven't seen each other in 30 years. You don't owe me anything. He glanced at me then, his expression unreadable in the dim light. This isn't about owing, Linda. This is about doing what's right. He paused, then added more softly, and maybe it's about second chances too. We drove in silence through the rain-slick streets of Indianapolis. The city had changed so much since our high school days. New skyscrapers reaching toward the clouds, old neighborhoods transformed by gentrification. Or maybe it was just me who had changed, seeing everything through the lens of a woman who had just lost her foundations. Your son, Christopher said finally, breaking the silence. Daniel, right? What does he do? He's an accountant, I replied, a hint of pride surfacing despite everything. Works for a good firm downtown. He's doing well for himself. I swallowed hard. At least I did that right. Christopher's hands tightened on the steering wheel. A son who turns his mother away during a crisis isn't doing well, regardless of his career success. His words stung because they touched the truth I'd been avoiding. Daniel's rejection wasn't a momentary lapse, but a reflection of who he'd become, or perhaps who he'd always been, beneath my blinders of maternal love. It's Lauren, I said, the excuse sounding hollow even to my own ears. His girlfriend. She's particular about their space. And he chose her comfort over your basic needs, Christopher observed, his tone matter-of-fact rather than judgmental. We pulled into the underground garage of a sleek high-rise building that I'd only ever seen from a distance. The doorman greeted Christopher by name as we entered the lobby, and the elevator whisked us to the top floor with silent efficiency. Christopher's penthouse took my breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city lights, while tasteful modern furniture and abstract art created an atmosphere of understated luxury. It was worlds away from my modest split level with its yard sale furniture and faded family photos. The guest room is this way, Christopher said, leading me down a hallway. He pushed open a door to reveal a spacious bedroom with its own sitting area and an ensuite bathroom gleaming with marble. There are robes in the closet. Use whatever you need. We can go shopping tomorrow for anything else. Chris, I began, overwhelmed by his generosity. I don't know how to thank you. He smiled then, the first real smile since we'd reunited, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of the boy I'd known. You can thank me by getting some rest. We'll figure everything else out in the morning. After he left, I stood motionless in the center of the luxurious room, trying to process the whirlwind of the past 24 hours. My house destroyed, my son's rejection, and now Christopher Hale, the road not taken, offering me shelter when I needed it most. I moved to the bathroom and caught sight of myself in the mirror, really saw myself for the first time in years. When had I stopped looking? When had I accepted becoming invisible? The woman staring back at me looked tired, defeated, faded. I'd spent so long being Daniel's mother that I'd forgotten how to be Linda. The hot shower washed away the grime of the day, but not the pain. Wrapped in a plush robe, I sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed myself to cry. Deep, heaving sobs that came from some wounded place I'd been ignoring for years. I don't know how long I sat there before a gentle knock sounded at the door. When I opened it, Christopher stood holding a mug of steaming tea. I thought you might need this, he said, offering me the mug. Our fingers brushed as I took it, sending an unexpected tingle up my arm. Thank you, I whispered, suddenly aware of how intimate the moment felt. Me in a robe, him in a casual sweater that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Linda, he said, hesitating. What happened with us? It was a lifetime ago. We were different people then, but I want you to know that I never forgot you. I looked down at my tea, unable to meet his gaze. I made my choice, I said quietly, and you built an amazing life without me. Yes, he agreed. I did. But there were moments. He trailed off, then straightened his shoulders. That's not important now. What matters is that you're safe, and tomorrow we'll start figuring out your next steps. After he left, I crawled beneath the luxurious covers and stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. In the space of a single day, I'd lost everything I thought defined me and been thrown back into the orbit of the man who represented my greatest what-if. Tomorrow, Christopher had said. Tomorrow, we would figure things out. But as I drifted toward sleep, one thought kept circling. What if this disaster was actually the universe's strange way of giving me a second chance? Morning came with dazzling sunlight streaming through windows I'd been too exhausted to cover. For a disorienting moment, I didn't know where I was. Then it all came rushing back. The storm, Daniel's rejection, Christopher's rescue. I found clothes laid out on the chair by the bed. Simple jeans and a sweater in what appeared to be my size, still with tags attached. The gesture touched me deeply. Christopher had thought about my needs while I slept. When I ventured out to the kitchen, I found him reading the newspaper at a glass dining table, two place settings arranged with fresh fruit, pastries, and coffee. "Good morning," he said, standing when he saw me. Such old-fashioned courtesy. Another reminder that Christopher wasn't just wealthy, but refined in a way Daniel had never managed to achieve despite Lauren's influences. "The clothes," I began awkwardly. "Thank you, but you didn't need to." "My assistant picked them up this morning," he said, dismissing my concerns with a wave. "I hope they fit. We can get more after breakfast." "Chris, I can't let you do all this. I'll find a hotel, deal with the insurance, figure something out. I didn't call you for help," he finished, his expression softening. "Linda, 30 years ago, I promised I would never let you stand alone. I broke that promise once, when I left for Chicago without fighting harder for what we had. I won't break it again." His words, so sincere and unexpected, left me speechless. I sank into the chair he held out for me, watching as he poured coffee into a delicate porcelain cup. "I have a suggestion," Christopher said as we ate. "My company owns several properties around the city, investments mostly. There's a small house in Fountain Square that's currently vacant. It needs some updating, but it's comfortable. It could be yours until your insurance comes through and you decide what you want to do next." I set down my fork, stunned by the offer. "I couldn't possibly—" "You could," he interrupted gently. "And you would be doing me a favor. The house needs someone living in it, and I trust you more than some random tenant." I studied his face, searching for hidden motives but found only sincerity. "Why are you doing all this, Chris?" "Really?" He leaned back, considering his answer. "Because 30 years ago you chose the safe option over the uncertain path with me. You chose security for your child over love. And while that broke my heart, I always respected your courage." His eyes held mine steadily. "Now life has taken away your safety net, and I have the means to provide you with a new one. It feels like balance, somehow." "I don't know what to say," I admitted. Christopher smiled. "Say you'll let me help. Say you'll take the house. Say you'll have dinner with me tonight, and we can talk about old times and new beginnings." Before I could answer, my phone rang. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. "Mom?" His voice sounded tense. "Where are you?" "I went by the hotel this morning, but they said you never checked in." The concern in his voice nearly melted my resolve. Then I remembered standing in the rain on his doorstep, the crisp bills he'd tried to give me, Lauren's cold eyes. "I'm safe," I said simply. "I found somewhere to stay." "Well, that's good," he replied, sounding relieved that the problem of his homeless mother had been solved without his intervention. "Lauren and I talked, and we think we can help you find a nice assisted living place. There's one near us that has apartments for seniors who can still live independently." "Assisted living?" I repeated, disbelief coloring my voice. "Daniel, I'm 50, not 80. I don't need assisted living. I need a house." "Mom, be reasonable. Your house is gone. The insurance will take months, and even then, it probably won't cover rebuilding. This is the perfect solution." Christopher watched me, his expression growing darker as he listened to my side of the conversation. "No, Daniel," I said firmly, surprising myself with my resolve. "That's not going to happen. I appreciate your concern, but I've made other arrangements." "What? Arrangements?" "Mom, you don't have any money. You can't just—" "I have to go," I interrupted, something shifting inside me. "I'll call you in a few days." I hung up before he could respond, my hand trembling slightly as I set down the phone. "Assisted living?" Christopher asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I nodded, unexpected tears springing to my eyes. Apparently, I'm a problem that needs solving, not a mother who needs help. Christopher reached across the table and took my hand in his. "Then it's settled," he said firmly. "You'll take the house. And tonight, we'll have dinner. And Daniel Carrington will learn that there are consequences to turning his back on the woman who gave him everything." The intensity in his eyes should have frightened me. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades, the intoxicating sense of being truly seen, truly valued, of mattering to someone who had the power to change things. "Yes," I said, squeezing his hand. "To all of it." The house in Fountain Square was nothing like I expected. From Christopher's description, I had imagined something modest, perhaps a bit run down. Instead, I found myself standing before a beautifully restored Victorian, its gingerbread trim freshly painted in shades of blue and cream, a wraparound porch, inviting with wicker furniture and hanging ferns. "This is vacant?" I asked incredulously, as Christopher unlocked the front door. "It's been used as a corporate retreat for out-of-town executives," he explained, stepping aside to let me enter first. "But we recently purchased a larger property. For that purpose, this one's been sitting empty for about 3 months." The interior was just as charming. Hardwood floors gleamed beneath area rugs, the kitchen boasted modern appliances while maintaining vintage charm, and the furniture throughout looked like it had been selected by a professional designer, which it probably had been. "Chris, this is too much," I protested, turning in a slow circle in the sunlit living room. "I can't accept this." "Linda," he said patiently, "what would you do instead? Go to a shelter? Drain your savings on a hotel? Accept Daniel's insulting offer of an assisted living facility?" He shook his head. "This house is sitting empty. You need a place to stay. It's simple logic." Put like that, it was hard to argue. Still, as Christopher showed me, around 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a small backyard garden, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into a fairy tale, one that would eventually end. "The neighborhood has changed a lot since we were young," Christopher commented as we returned to the kitchen. "It's all artisan coffee shops and gastropubs now. You'll like it here." I ran my hand along the marble countertop, trying to reconcile this moment with where I'd been just 24 hours earlier. "How long can I stay?" Christopher's expression softened. "As long as you need. The insurance process will take time, and you shouldn't rush your decisions about what comes next." What comes next? Such a simple phrase for the enormous uncertainty that stretched before me. At 50, I was essentially starting over. My material possessions reduced to whatever the salvage teams might recover from my ruined house. My emotional foundation shaken by my son's betrayal. "I don't know how to thank you," I said, fighting back tears for what felt like the 100th time that day. Christopher stepped closer, his presence both comforting and exhilarating. "Have dinner with me tonight," he said. "That's all the thanks I need." After he left, promising to return at 7, I wandered through the house again, trying to absorb my new reality. The master bedroom had a bay window overlooking the garden, with a window seat where I could imagine reading or simply watching the changing seasons. The closet was empty, save for a few hangers, a stark reminder of everything I'd lost. My phone buzzed with a text from Susan, checking on me again. I hesitated, then typed a brief response explaining that my house was gone, but I was staying with an old friend. I couldn't bring myself to mention Daniel's rejection or Christopher's identity. How could I explain something I barely understood myself? The afternoon passed in a blur of practical matters. Christopher's assistant arrived with more clothes. Enough to get me through a week, she explained, along with toiletries, a new cell phone charger, and a laptop, in case you need to handle insurance claims online. I accepted everything with a growing sense of unreality, as if I were watching someone else's life unfold. By 6:30, I was showered and dressed in one of the new outfits, a simple navy dress that fit surprisingly well. I applied mascara and lipstick, using products from the thoughtfully assembled toiletry kit, and for the first time since the storm, I looked at my reflection with something approaching recognition. I was still Linda Carrington, despite everything. Christopher arrived precisely at 7, bearing flowers, not roses, which would have been too presumptuous, but a tasteful arrangement of lilies and hydrangeas. He'd changed into a different suit, this one a deep blue that complemented his silver-streaked hair and brought out the blue in his eyes. "You look beautiful," he said, his gaze warm with appreciation. "It's amazing what a hot shower and clean clothes can do," I replied, deflecting the compliment out of habit. "No," he corrected gently. "It's you, Linda. It's always been you." The restaurant he took me to was exactly what I would have expected from a man of his stature, elegant without being ostentatious, with well-spaced tables that ensured privacy, and servers who appeared and disappeared with practiced discretion. The maitre d' greeted Christopher by name and showed us to what was clearly the best table in the house, overlooking the city lights. "Do you come here often?" I asked after we were seated and had ordered drinks, a scotch for him, a glass of white wine for me. "Often enough to be recognized," he admitted. "It's convenient for business dinners." He smiled. "But this isn't business." "What is it then?" I asked before I could stop myself. Christopher considered his answer carefully. "A reunion. A chance to catch up with someone who once meant everything to me." He paused. "And perhaps the beginning of something new." The waiter arrived with our drinks, giving me a moment to collect myself. Christopher's directness both thrilled and terrified me. In the day since we'd reconnected, I'd been so consumed by gratitude and practical concerns that I hadn't fully allowed myself to consider what his reappearance in my life might really mean. "Tell me about your life," I said, deflecting. Again. "I know the broad strokes from what I've read in the papers. Hale innovations, tech investments, philanthropy. But what's behind all that? Are you happy, Chris?" He smiled at the question. "Happy? I've been successful beyond anything I could have imagined when we were 17. I've built something substantial. I've had the freedom to pursue my interests, to travel, to learn." He swirled, the amber liquid in his glass. "But happy? That's more complicated. Were you ever married?" I asked, realizing I didn't know this basic fact about his life. "Once," he admitted. "It lasted 6 years. Helen was brilliant, driven, a corporate attorney with ambitions that matched my own. We made sense on paper." He shrugged slightly. "Sometimes I think we were too similar. Two people racing toward the same goals, eventually running parallel rather than together." "Any children?" I asked, wondering if there were other Christophers out there, boys with his eyes and quiet determination. "No," he said, a shadow crossing his face. "Helen was focused on her career, and by the time we discussed it, things were already unraveling between us." He looked at me directly. "And you? After Thomas died, did you ever remarry?" I shook my head. "There was never time. Or perhaps I never made time. Daniel became my whole world. I didn't add what we both knew, that raising the son who had just rejected me had been my life's work, my justification for every other path not taken. And now?" Christopher asked quietly. "Now I'm 50 years old, starting over with nothing but the clothes a kind man bought. Me and a house I'm borrowing," I said, trying to keep my tone light despite the weight of the words. "You have more than that, Linda," Christopher said, reaching across the table to cover my hand with his. "You have resilience, intelligence, beauty that hasn't faded a day since we were teenagers. And you have me, if you want." His words hung between us, laden with possibilities. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed insistently in my purse. I glanced at it apologetically, then froze when I saw Daniel's name on the screen again. "I should take this," I said. "It's Daniel." Christopher nodded, withdrawing his hand. "Of course." I stepped away from the table, moving to a quiet corner near the restrooms. "Daniel, is everything okay?" "Mom, where are you staying?" he demanded without preamble. "Lauren and I stopped by the shelter in the Red Cross Center. No one's seen you." "I told you, I've made other arrangements," I replied, tension creeping back into my shoulders. "What arrangements? With who?" "Mom, you can't just disappear like this. We're worried." The "we" stung, as if he and Lauren were a united front of concern, rather than the people who had turned me away in my darkest hour. "I'm staying with a friend," I said simply. "What friend?" "All your friends live in our old neighborhood, and most of them are at the shelter." I took a deep breath. "An old friend. From before you were born." There was a pause. "Mom, are you being taken advantage of? You know you can't trust just anyone. You're vulnerable right now, and people might see you as an easy target." The irony of his concern after his own rejection was almost too much to bear. "I'm fine, Daniel. Better than fine, actually. For the first time in a long time, I'm being treated with respect and kindness." "What's that supposed to mean?" His voice had an edge now. "Look, just tell me where you are and I'll come get you. Lauren and I talked and you can stay with us for a few days while we look into that assisted living place." Something snapped inside me. "No, Daniel. I'm not going to an assisted living facility. I'm not coming to stay with you and Lauren for a few days. I'm rebuilding my life on my terms, with people who actually want me around." "Mom, you're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years," I interrupted. "I have to go. My dinner date is waiting." "Dinner date? What dinner date? Mom!" I hung up, my heart racing. I'd never spoken to Daniel that way before, never asserted myself against his wishes or challenged his assumptions about me. It felt terrifying and exhilarating all at once. When I returned to the table, Christopher studied my face. "Everything okay?" "No," I admitted. "But maybe that's not a bad thing." He nodded, understanding, without needing the details. Sometimes the hardest walls to break down are the ones we build ourselves. As our dinner arrived, perfectly seared scallops for me, steak for him, conversation shifted to lighter topics. Memories of our high school days, mutual acquaintances we'd lost touch with, the changes in Indianapolis over the decades. For a few hours, I forgot about destroyed houses and ungrateful sons and focused instead on rediscovering the man across from me. Christopher at 50 was both familiar and new. The same wry sense of humor and attentive listening I remembered, now layered with confidence born of achievement and the quiet wisdom that comes from living fully. When he spoke about his work, his eyes lit with the same passion I'd seen when we were teenagers, and he'd describe his dreams of changing the world through technology. By the time dessert arrived, a delicate chocolate souffle we shared, I felt more alive than I had in years. Christopher Hale saw me not as Daniel's mother or a storm victim or a middle-aged woman past her prime, but as Linda, the girl he'd loved, the woman I'd become, the person I might still be. "I'd like to see you again," he said as he drove me back to the Fountain Square house. Not out of pity or obligation, but because being with you tonight made me happier than I've been in a very long time. In the dim light of the car, his profile was strong and sure, and I allowed myself to really look at him, to acknowledge the attraction that had never fully died, merely been buried under decades of different choices. "I'd like that, too," I answered honestly. When we reached the house, he walked me to the door like we were on a proper date, not just two middle-aged people with complicated histories. Under the porch light, he hesitated, then leaned in slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted. I didn't want to pull away. His kiss was gentle, questioning, a tentative bridge between our past and whatever might come next. When we separated, his eyes searched mine. "Good night, Linda," he said softly. "Good night, Chris," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. I watched him drive away, my fingers touching my lips where his had been moments before. Inside the borrowed house, I moved through rooms that weren't mine, but somehow already felt more like home than the place I'd lived for 30 years. As I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed again. Daniel, demanding answers I wasn't ready to give. I silenced it and set it aside. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges: insurance claims, salvage attempts, decisions about what came next. But tonight, for the first time since the storm, perhaps for the first time in decades, I felt like I wasn't merely surviving, but on the verge of truly living again. 3 weeks. Passed in a blur of insurance adjusters, salvage operations, and discovering a new rhythm to my days. The house in Fountain Square began to feel like mine. I arranged flowers in vases, found my favorite coffee at a nearby shop, and learned which floorboards creaked at night. Small comforts in a life upended. Christopher and I fell into a pattern that felt both new and familiar. Dinners twice a week, long conversations that stretched into the night, careful steps towards something neither of us was quite ready to name. He never pushed, never presumed, but his steady presence became the foundation upon which I was rebuilding myself. The insurance company finally made an offer, I told him one evening as we walked through Fountain Square, the neighborhood alive with weekend energy. Street musicians playing jazz, couples strolling hand in hand, restaurants spilling warm light onto the sidewalks. "And?" Christopher asked, his hand resting lightly at the small of my back. "It's about what I expected. Enough to pay off the mortgage and have a little left over, but not enough to rebuild. Not in this market." I shrugged, surprising myself with how little the news upset me. "I guess I'm officially starting over. What do you want to do?" His question was simple but profound. What did I want? For so many years, my wants had been secondary to Daniel's needs, to practical constraints, to the inertia of an established life. "I'm not sure yet," I admitted, "but I'm beginning to think that losing everything might have been the best thing that could have happened to me." Christopher smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling in a way I found increasingly endearing. "From catastrophe to opportunity. I always knew you were resilient." We stopped at a small wine bar, taking a table near the window. Christopher ordered for us. He'd discovered my preference for bold reds over the past weeks, and we settled into the comfortable silence of people who no longer needed to fill every moment with words. "I've been thinking," he said finally, swirling the ruby liquid in his glass. "What would you say to coming to work for me?" I blinked in surprise. "For you? Chris, I'm a secretary with an associate's degree from the 1990s. Your company is cutting-edge tech. What could I possibly do there?" "You're selling yourself short," he replied, leaning forward. "You've managed complex schedules, client relationships, and office operations for decades. Those skills are valuable in any industry." His eyes met mine. "Besides, I'm launching a foundation, the Hale Innovation Fund for Education. It needs someone organized, empathetic, good with people, someone like you." The offer stunned me. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, he urged. No pressure, no expectations. But Linda, you deserve more than being someone's assistant for the rest of your working life. Before I could respond, a commotion near the door caught my attention. My stomach dropped as I recognized the couple entering the wine bar. Daniel and Lauren, dressed for a night out, her arm possessively linked through his. Chris, I whispered urgently. My son just walked in. Christopher turned slightly, his expression revealing nothing as he assessed the young couple being seated across the room. Do you want to leave? He asked, already reaching for his wallet. I hesitated, my initial instinct to flee warring with a newfound resolve. No, I said finally. I'm not doing anything wrong. I shouldn't have to hide. Christopher's smile held approval. Then we stay. For several minutes, I tried to focus on our conversation, hyper-aware of Daniel's presence while praying he wouldn't notice me. But Indianapolis, for all its growth, was still a small city in some ways. I was reaching for my wine glass when I heard it, a familiar voice tinged with disbelief. Mom? I looked up to find Daniel standing beside our table, Lauren hovering a few steps behind him. His expression cycled rapidly through surprise, confusion, and something that looked unsettlingly like judgment. Daniel, I acknowledged, straightening my spine. What a coincidence. His eyes darted between me and Christopher, narrowing slightly. You never called me back. I've been worried sick. The insurance adjuster said you'd been by the house, but you wouldn't give him your new address. The accusation in my nip. His tone made my cheeks burn. I've been busy, I said simply. Daniel's attention shifted fully to Christopher, suspicion evident in his stance. And who's this? Before I could answer, Christopher extended his hand. Christopher Hale. I'm an old friend of your mother's. Daniel's eyes widened in recognition of the name. Christopher's reputation in Indianapolis business circles preceded him. He shook the offered hand automatically, clearly thrown off balance. Christopher Hale, the tech entrepreneur? Lauren interjected, stepping forward with sudden interest. Her calculating gaze swept over Christopher, taking in his expensive watch, tailored clothing, the subtle signals of wealth. The same, Christopher confirmed with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. How do you know my, mother? Daniel demanded, his tone bordering on rudeness. We dated in high school, I answered, before Christopher could, something steely entering my voice. Before I met your father. Lauren's eyebrows rose, her expression a mixture of disbelief and reassessment as she looked at me with new eyes. You dated. She gestured vaguely toward Christopher. Yes, Lauren, I said, meeting her gaze. Steadily. Believe it or not, I had a life before I became a mother. Daniel flushed, clearly uncomfortable with this revelation. And you've been staying with him? All this time? Mom, that's inappropriate. The word hung in the air, laden with judgment. I felt something snap inside, the last thread of patience for my son's entitlement. Inappropriate? I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. What's inappropriate, Daniel, is turning your mother away during a natural disaster. What's inappropriate is suggesting your 50-year-old parent belongs in assisted living because she's an inconvenience to your girlfriend. I stood, hands flat on the table to stop their trembling. What's inappropriate is forgetting who clothed you, fed you, and sacrificed everything so you could become the man standing before me now. The wine bar had grown quiet, other patrons pretending not to listen while obviously hanging on every word. Daniel's face had gone from flushed to pale. Mom, that's not fair. No, it wasn't fair, I agreed, my voice steadier now. It wasn't fair when I stood on your porch in the rain and you offered me $60 for a hotel room instead of your couch. I drew a deep breath. But life isn't fair, Daniel. I learned that when your father died and I had to raise you alone. I'm just surprised I had to learn it again from my own son. Lauren tugged at Daniel's sleeve. Let's go, she murmured, clearly mortified by the public scene. Daniel hesitated, his expression conflicted. Mom, you don't understand. Lauren and I understand perfectly, I interrupted. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. Something flickered in his eyes. Hurt. Confusion. Perhaps the first glimmer of genuine remorse. For a moment, I glimpsed my little boy beneath the entitled adult he'd become, and my heart ached. But I remained standing, my gaze steady. We should talk, he said finally, privately, about the insurance money, about what you're going to do next. There's nothing to discuss, I replied. The insurance settlement is mine. My plans are mine. For For the first time in 30 years, I'm putting myself first. Christopher stood beside me, his presence solid and supportive without being intrusive. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His being there said everything. Daniel's eyes narrowed as he looked between us. So that's it? You're choosing him over your own family? The emotional manipulation was so transparent it almost made me laugh. No, Daniel. You chose Lauren over family 3 weeks ago. I'm simply accepting your decision and moving on with my life. Lauren pulled more insistently at Daniel's arm. We're going to be late for our reservation, she hissed, her earlier interest in Christopher clearly outweighed by her embarrassment. This conversation isn't over, Mom, Daniel said, as he allowed Lauren to lead him away. I'll call you tomorrow. I may not answer, I replied honestly. After they left, I sank back into my chair, suddenly exhausted. I'm sorry about that, I said to Christopher. He reached across the table to take my hand. Don't apologize. You were magnificent. I was harsh, I said, guilt already creeping in. He's still my son. He's an adult who made a choice, Christopher corrected gently. You're holding him accountable, not cutting him off. There's a difference. He squeezed my hand. You've spent your entire adult life being Daniel's mother. Maybe it's time to remember how to be Linda. His words hit me with unexpected force. Who was Linda? Separate from being Daniel's mother. What did she want, dream? Of hope for? I'd buried those questions so deeply I wasn't sure I knew the answers anymore. The foundation job, I said suddenly. Tell me more about it. Christopher's eyes lit up. It's something I've wanted to do for years. Creating opportunities for kids from disadvantaged backgrounds to access technology education. Scholarships, mentorship programs, tech boot camps in underserved communities. His passion was palpable. The money is set aside. What I need is someone to help build it from the ground up. Someone with heart, organizational skills, and perspective. And you think that's me? I asked, still doubtful. I know it's you, he replied without hesitation. You have the perfect combination of warmth and efficiency. You understand what it means to want more for a child than they might be able to access otherwise. He paused. But only if it interests you. This isn't charity, Linda. It's an opportunity I'd offer regardless of our personal connection. For the first time, I allowed myself to truly consider it, not just as a job, but as a purpose. A way to channel my maternal instincts toward a broader good rather than a single ungrateful son. I'd need to learn a lot, I said slowly. We all do every day, Christopher replied. That's what makes life interesting. Later that night, as Christopher walked me to my door, the confrontation with Daniel still weighed on me. Do you think he'll ever understand? I asked as we stood on the porch, the same question I'd been turning over since leaving the wine bar. Christopher considered this seriously. Understanding requires empathy, and empathy requires seeing beyond yourself. Daniel has been the center of your universe for so long that he may need time to adjust to a world where your needs matter too. He touched my cheek gently. But he's your son. Somewhere inside is the boy you raised, the one who knew right from wrong before status and appearances became his priority. His words offered more comfort than false reassurances would have. Christopher didn't sugarcoat the truth, and I was grateful for that honesty. Thank you, I said. Not just for tonight, but for everything. For seeing me when I felt invisible. His kiss was tender, affirming, a promise without pressure. Good night, Linda, he murmured against my hair. Inside, I moved through my evening routine with a strange mixture of emotions, lingering anger at Daniel, gratitude for Christopher, and beneath it all, a growing sense of anticipation. For the first time in decades, my future felt wide open, full of possibilities I was only beginning to imagine. As I drifted toward sleep, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. We need to talk. This isn't like you, Mom. I stared at the words, recognizing the subtle manipulation, implying that standing up for myself was somehow out of character, that asserting boundaries was a betrayal of who I was supposed to be. Maybe he was right. Maybe this wasn't like the mother he'd known, the woman who had accommodated, sacrificed, and diminished herself to make his life easier. But as I set the phone aside without replying, I realized I was becoming someone new, or perhaps rediscovering someone who had been buried for far too long. Linda Carrington, not just Daniel's mother, not just Tom's widow, not even Christopher Hale's high school sweetheart, just Linda. And for the first time in 30 years, that felt like enough. The Hale Innovation Fund for Education occupied the top floor of a renovated warehouse in Fletcher Place, another revitalized Indianapolis neighborhood not far from Fountain Square. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the open workspace with natural light, while exposed brick and timber beams preserved the building's industrial character. It was exactly the kind of place I would have found intimidating a month ago, too modern, too sophisticated for a middle-aged woman whose technical skills peaked with Excel spreadsheets. Now, as I arranged family photos on my new desk, salvaged pictures of my parents, a younger Daniel, even one of Tom that had survived the storm, I felt a surprising sense of belonging. My office, with its glass walls and view of the downtown skyline, signaled a level of professional respect I hadn't experienced in decades. "Settling in okay?" Christopher asked from the doorway, casual in jeans and a button-down rather than his usual suit. This was a different side of him, the innovative entrepreneur rather than the polished executive. "It's starting to feel real," I admitted, adjusting the position of a small plant he'd given me as an office-warming gift. "Though I'm still not entirely convinced I'm qualified." Christopher leaned against the doorframe, his expression serious. "You know why I wanted you for this, right? Beyond any personal connection?" I shook my head. "Because you understand what it means to sacrifice for education, to believe in someone's potential so deeply that you'll do whatever it takes to help them succeed." He stepped into the office. "That's the heart of this foundation, Linda. Yes, we need someone who can manage budgets and coordinate programs, but more importantly, we need someone who innately understands the mission." His faith in me was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. "I won't let you down," I promised. "I know you won't," he replied with a smile. Now the team's waiting in the conference room. Ready to meet them? The foundation team was small but impressive. A former educator who specialized in curriculum development, a tech whiz, barely older than Daniel who had taught himself coding in a public library, a grant writer with a background in nonprofit management, and a community outreach coordinator whose enthusiasm was infectious. They welcomed me warmly, without the skepticism I'd feared. "We're so excited to have you on board, Linda," said Marissa, the outreach coordinator, as we broke for lunch after the morning meeting. "Christopher has been talking about launching this foundation for years, but he said he was waiting for the right person to lead the operations side." "Years?" I asked, surprised. "How long have you known him?" "Oh, I interned at Hale Innovations right out of college about 5 years ago," she explained. "Christopher mentored me personally. He does that with a lot of first-generation college grads. He's been my hero ever since." She leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Between us, I think he's been holding off on launching the foundation until he found someone he could really trust with his vision. He's very protective of it." Her words added another layer to my understanding of Christopher, not just the successful businessman or the kind man who had come to my rescue, but someone who quietly changed lives without seeking recognition. Someone who had been building this dream long before I re-entered his picture. My new role consumed me in the best possible way. Days filled with meaningful work. Evenings often spent with Christopher. Sometimes discussing foundation business over dinner. Sometimes simply enjoying each other's company as our relationship deepened. Weekends exploring my new neighborhood, or visiting the few possessions the salvage team had recovered from my old house, now stored in a unit Christopher had arranged. Daniel continued to text and call, his messages oscillating between concern, confusion, and thinly veiled judgment. I responded when I felt emotionally equipped to do so, but maintained my boundaries. I wasn't ready to untangle the complex knot of hurt and disappointment he had created, not while I was still finding my footing in this new life. 6 weeks after the storm, 6 weeks that felt like both a moment and a lifetime, Christopher invited me to a charity gala benefiting Indianapolis public schools. "The foundation should have a presence," he explained, "and as our executive director, you should be there." Executive director. The title still felt strange, almost presumptuous, but I was learning to wear it, to trust that Christopher had seen capabilities in me that I'd forgotten or never fully acknowledged. "I don't have anything to wear to something like that," I protested weakly. Christopher's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Funny you should mention that. There's a dress boutique on Mass Ave that's expecting you this afternoon. Hannah from my office will meet you there." "Chris, you can't keep buying me things," I objected, though with less conviction than the first time he'd arranged such a gesture. "People will talk. People always talk," he replied with a shrug. "Let them. I'm not ashamed of helping someone I care about." His expression softened. "Besides, the foundation is covering this one. Consider it part of your job." The boutique experience was surreal. A private appointment with a stylist who treated me like visiting royalty. Champagne served in delicate flutes. Dresses brought out one by one for my consideration. Hannah, Christopher's efficient assistant, offered opinions and took photos of the final contenders for the office files, though I suspected they were for Christopher himself. I ultimately chose a gown in deep emerald that the stylist declared perfection with your coloring, elegantly simple in front, with a dramatic draped back that made me feel simultaneously sophisticated and daring. It was a dress for a woman who wasn't afraid to be seen, a woman stepping confidently into a new chapter. The night of the gala, Christopher picked me up in his Mercedes, his appreciative gaze as I opened the door making me blush like a teenager. "You are breathtaking," he said simply. In his tuxedo, he looked like he belonged on a movie screen, distinguished, commanding, but with that warmth in his eyes that was reserved for me alone. As we drove toward the downtown hotel hosting the event, I felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. "Will there be press there?" I asked, suddenly concerned about public appearances. "Some local media, probably," Christopher confirmed. "Is that a problem?" I thought about Daniel, about the possibility of him seeing photos of me at a black tie event with one of Indianapolis's most eligible bachelors. No, I decided, it's not a problem. The ballroom was a glittering spectacle of Indianapolis's elite, old money, new tech wealth, political figures, and community leaders all mingling beneath crystal chandeliers. Christopher moved through the crowd with practiced ease, his hand resting lightly at the small of my back as he introduced me to what felt like half the city. "Linda is heading our new education foundation," he would say, his voice warm with pride. "She's bringing a much-needed perspective to our work with underserved schools." No one questioned my qualifications or asked about my background. In this world, Christopher Hale's endorsement was apparently credential enough. I found myself engaging in conversations about educational inequality, digital literacy gaps, and community partnerships with people who actually listened to my opinions. It was intoxicating. "Linda Carrington?" I turned at the sound of a vaguely familiar voice to find Robert Parker, my former boss, looking at me with undisguised astonishment. Beside him stood his wife, Sandra, whose book club I'd been too busy to join for years despite her repeated invitations. "Robert, Sandra," I greeted them with a smile. "How lovely to see you." "We heard about your house in the storm," Sandra said, her expression sympathetic. "It's just terrible. The whole neighborhood was devastated." "Yes, it was quite a loss," I acknowledged. "But sometimes endings create space for new beginnings." Robert's gaze shifted to Christopher, who had stepped away briefly to speak with the mayor, but was now returning to my side. "And you're here with Christopher Hale?" His tone conveyed disbelief bordering on suspicion, as if I might be crashing the event. "Linda is my date and my colleague," Christopher interjected smoothly, extending his hand to Robert. "You must be Robert Parker. Linda speaks highly of her years at your firm." Robert shook Christopher's hand automatically, clearly flustered. "Yes, Linda was an excellent secretary. Very reliable. She's much more than excellent in her role as executive director of the Hale Innovation Fund," Christopher replied, his tone pleasant but with an undercurrent of steel. "Her insights are transforming our approach to educational equity." The Parkers exchanged glances, recalibrating their understanding of a woman they had pigeonholed as merely competent, merely supportive, merely peripheral. "How wonderful," Sandra managed, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Linda, we must catch up properly sometime." "I'd like that," I replied, though we both knew it would never happen. As they moved away, Christopher leaned close to my ear. "Your former boss seems like a bit of a dinosaur." I laughed softly. "He's not bad, really. Just traditional in his thinking." I looked around the glittering room, at the life I had suddenly found myself part of. "This all feels like a dream sometimes." "Not a dream," Christopher corrected gently. "Just a different reality than the one you'd resigned yourself to." His eyes held mine. "You deserve this, Linda. All of it." The evening continued in a blur of introductions, champagne and dancing. Yes, dancing. Something I hadn't done since Daniel's wedding. Christopher led with confident grace, holding me just close enough to be intimate without crossing into inappropriate. As we moved across the floor, I caught glimpses of other couples watching us, curiosity evident in their expressions. "People are staring," I murmured. "Let them," Christopher replied, echoing his earlier sentiment. "They're just witnessing something they all secretly want. A second chance at happiness." His words warmed me from within, more intoxicating than the champagne. We were so absorbed in each other that I didn't immediately notice the commotion near the ballroom entrance. not until a familiar voice cut through the ambient noise of the event. "Mom?" I turned to find Daniel standing just inside the doorway, Lauren clutching his arm. They were dressed for the gala, but looked out of place somehow. Lauren overdressed in a gown that tried too hard, Daniel uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo. His expression as he took in the sight of me dancing with Christopher was one of utter confusion. "Daniel," I acknowledged as Christopher and I approached them. "What a surprise." "One of the junior partners at my firm had tickets but couldn't attend," he explained, his eyes darting between Christopher and me. "He offered them to us last minute." His gaze lingered on my emerald gown, the elegant updo a stylist had created for my normally practical hair. "You look different." "Thank you, I think," I replied, trying to keep my tone light despite the tension crackling between us. Lauren's attention was fixed entirely on Christopher, her smile becoming more brilliant by the second. "Mr. Hale, it's such an honor to meet you properly. Your keynote at last year's Business Leaders Forum was absolutely inspiring." Christopher acknowledged her compliment with a polite nod, but kept his arm firmly around my waist. "Linda, would you like to get some air? The terrace has a beautiful view of the city." Before I could respond, Daniel interjected, "Actually, Mom, could we speak privately for a moment?" I hesitated, looking to Christopher. He squeezed my waist gently. "I'll get us some fresh drinks. Take your time." As Christopher and Lauren moved away in opposite directions, he toward the bar, she toward a group of socialites she clearly recognized, Daniel and I found ourselves in an awkward tableau of unresolved tension. "Let's step outside," I suggested, leading him toward the terrace Christopher had mentioned. The night air was cool against my bare shoulders, the Indianapolis skyline glittering against the dark sky. A few other guests mingled on the terrace, but we found a relatively private corner near a decorative planter. "What's going on, Mom?" Daniel asked without preamble. "First you're living in some house he owns, then you're working for him, now you're his, what? Date? Girlfriend? All of the above, I suppose," I replied calmly. "Christopher and I have reconnected, yes. He's offered me opportunities I never thought I'd have at this stage of my life. It happened awfully fast," Daniel observed, suspicion evident in his tone. "Right after you lost everything. Don't you think that's convenient for him?" The implication stung. "Convenient how, exactly?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "He's obviously taking advantage of your vulnerability. A lonely middle-aged woman who just lost her home." "Stop right there," I interrupted, my voice low but intense. "I am not some pathetic, desperate victim being manipulated by a predatory man. I am a capable adult making choices about my own life." I drew a steadying breath. "And if we're talking about taking advantage, let's discuss how you and Lauren treated me when I showed up at your door that night." Daniel had the grace to look ashamed, at least momentarily. We weren't prepared. Lauren had just redecorated the guest room, and her parents were coming that weekend. "Don't," I said quietly. "Don't make excuses. Not now, not after all this time." I gestured toward the ballroom where Christopher stood chatting with the mayor again, his presence commanding even from a distance. Christopher didn't hesitate. He didn't make excuses. He offered help without conditions, without making me feel like a burden. "He's obviously got ulterior motives," Daniel insisted, but with less conviction. "And if he does?" I challenged. "If his ulterior motive is wanting to build a relationship with someone he cares about? Is that so terrible?" I shook my head. "Daniel, you're so determined to believe I'm being manipulated that you can't see I'm finally being valued." Something in my words seemed to penetrate his defensiveness. He looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. "You're different," he said slowly. "It's not just the dress or the hair. You seem more, I don't know, confident?" "I am different," I agreed. "I've found parts of myself I thought were gone forever. I'm working on something meaningful, building a new life, allowing myself to feel things I've denied for decades." I reached out to touch his arm. "I'm still your mother. That won't ever change. But I'm also Linda, a woman with her own identity, her own dreams." Daniel was silent for a long moment, processing. "Lauren says he's just using you for some kind of image makeover, that men like him don't seriously date women like—" He trailed off, realizing too late the cruelty of what he'd been about to say. "Women like me," I finished for him. "Ordinary women. Women without prestigious degrees or social connections or perfect bodies." I smiled sadly. Perhaps Lauren should consider that men like Christopher, men of substance, of character, value things beyond appearances and status. The barb hit its mark. Daniel flushed, no doubt recognizing Lauren in my implied critique. Before he could respond, the terrace doors opened, and Christopher emerged with 2 champagne flutes. He paused when he saw us, clearly not wanting to interrupt. "We should get back to the party," I said to Daniel. "But I'd like to have lunch sometime, just the 2 of us. We have more to talk about." Daniel nodded, his expression conflicted. "I'd like that," he said, and I believed him. As he turned to leave, he added, "Mom, I'm sorry. About that night. About a lot of things. It wasn't a full reckoning, but it was a start." "I know," I replied. "Me too." As Daniel disappeared back into the ballroom, Christopher approached, offering me a champagne flute. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Getting there," I replied honestly. Slowly. Christopher's free hand found mine, our fingers intertwining naturally. Sometimes slow is the only way to heal properly. We stood together on the terrace, the city lights twinkling below us, the future stretching before us, uncertain but full of promise. And for the first time since the storm had taken my old life, I felt completely, unreservedly grateful for everything I had lost and everything I had found. Autumn settled over Indianapolis, painting Fountain Square in russets and golds. 3 months had passed since the storm that had destroyed my house and, paradoxically, rebuilt my life. The foundation was thriving under my leadership. We'd launched 2 pilot programs in underfunded schools and secured matching grants that doubled our initial impact. My relationship with Christopher had deepened into something I'd never expected to find at 50. A partnership of equals, passionate and thoughtful, neither of us taking the other for granted. The house in Fountain Square no longer felt borrowed. I'd added my own touches, planted chrysanthemums along the walkway, hung art I'd found at local galleries. Christopher had formally transferred the deed into my name, despite my protests. "It's an investment in my executive director's well-being," he'd insisted with that smile that still made my heart flutter. "Besides, I'm over at your place more often than my penthouse these days." Consider it enlightened self-interest. My relationship with Daniel remained complicated but healing. Our lunch after the gala had been awkward but honest, the first of several conversations that were slowly bridging the chasm his rejection had created. He'd admitted that Lauren had been the driving force behind turning me away that night, but also acknowledged his own weakness in not standing up for me. "I was trying so hard to be the man she wanted," he'd confessed. "That I forgot to be the son you raised." Progress came in small moments. Daniel helping me hang curtains in my new home. A text message asking my advice about a work conflict. An invitation to dinner without Lauren present. The wound was closing, even if the scar would always remain. I was in my office at the foundation, reviewing applications for our scholarship program, when my assistant buzzed to let me know Daniel was in the reception area. "He doesn't have an appointment," she added apologetically, "but he says it's important." Surprise and concern mingled as I told her to send him in. Daniel rarely visited me at work, especially unannounced. When he entered, his expression was troubled. His tie loosened as if he'd been pulling at it nervously. "Daniel? Is everything okay?" I stood from behind my desk, maternal instincts immediately on alert. "I need to talk to you," he said, closing the door behind him. "About Lauren. About everything." I gestured toward the sitting area in the corner of my office, a comfortable space with armchairs where I often held less formal meetings. Daniel sank into one of the chairs, running a hand through his hair in a gesture so like his father it momentarily took my breath away. "Lauren and I broke up," he announced without preamble. "Oh, Daniel," I said, genuinely surprised. Despite my complicated feelings about Lauren, I knew Daniel had been deeply invested in the relationship. "I'm sorry. What happened?" He gave a humorless laugh. "You happened, in a way. Or rather, you and Christopher." I frowned, not understanding. "What do you mean?" Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Ever since the gala, Lauren's been obsessed with your relationship with Christopher. At first, she kept insisting he was using you, that it was some kind of publicity stunt or midlife crisis. But then she saw the article in Indianapolis Monthly. The profile on the foundation," I supplied, remembering the piece that had featured Christopher and me, discussing our educational initiatives. The photographer had captured a moment between us, a shared look that conveyed our personal connection without being inappropriate for a business profile. "Right," Daniel confirmed. After that, Lauren changed tactics. Suddenly, she was asking me all these questions about Christopher, his habits, his preferences, where he vacations. Daniel's expression darkened. Then last week, I found emails on her laptop. She'd been reaching out to her cousin who works at an events company that Hale Innovation sometimes uses, trying to arrange a chance meeting with Christopher. She was trying to… what? Meet him behind your back? I was struggling to understand the implication. Daniel's laugh was bitter this time. No, Mom. She was trying to replace… you. He met my gaze directly. Lauren saw your relationship with Christopher as a stepping stone. A wealthy, influential man who's apparently attracted to Carringtons. When I confronted her, she didn't even really deny it. She said some things about you, about me, about what she deserved, that I can't repeat. The revelation left me momentarily speechless, not because I was particularly surprised by Lauren's character, but because of what it must have cost Daniel to see her true nature so starkly exposed. I'm so sorry, I said finally. That must have been devastating. The worst part, Daniel continued, his voice thick with emotion, is that I kept thinking about the night of the storm, how she convinced me to turn you away, my own mother, because having you there might complicate things. And I let her, because I was so desperate to make her happy, to be the kind of man she wanted. He looked up, his eyes bright with unshed tears. What kind of man does that make me? I moved from my chair to sit beside him, taking his hand in mine. It makes you human, Daniel. We all make mistakes, especially when we're trying to please people we care about. I squeezed his fingers. The question is what you do afterward, how you make amends, how you grow. He nodded slowly. I've been thinking a lot about Dad lately, about what he would say if he could see me now. He swallowed hard. I don't think he'd be very proud of the man I've become. Your father loved you unconditionally, I said gently, just as I do. But he also believed in accountability, in owning your mistakes and learning from them. Daniel was quiet for a moment, gathering himself. There's something else I need to tell you, he said finally. About the house. Your house. The one that was destroyed in the storm. What about it? I asked, puzzled by this shift in topic. After the insurance settlement came through, Lauren convinced me that I should help you manage it. He couldn't meet my eyes now. She said that at your age, with the trauma of losing everything, you weren't equipped to make sound financial decisions. That as your son, I had a responsibility to step in. A chill ran through me. What are you saying, Daniel? I went to the insurance company. I told them I was helping you with the claim, that you'd asked me to handle the details since you were staying at a shelter, and didn't have reliable contact information. His voice had dropped to nearly a whisper. They believed me. I was listed as your next of kin on all your documents. They were going to send the settlement check to my address. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. You were going to take my insurance money? My voice sounded distant to my own ears as if someone else were speaking. No! Daniel's head snapped up. Not take it. Just manage it. For you. At least that's what I told myself. He ran a hand over his face. Lauren had all these plans. Investments she thought would be smarter than whatever you might do with it. But deep down, I knew. He trailed off, shame evident in every line of his body. You knew it was wrong. I finished for him. You knew you were taking advantage of my vulnerability. Yes, he admitted, the single word carrying the weight of his guilt. But I didn't go through with it. I blinked in surprise. What? After that first night when I saw you with Christopher at the wine bar, the way you stood up to me, the things you said, something shifted. I called the insurance company the next day and told them there had been a misunderstanding, that all communication should go directly to you. He met my gaze at last. I couldn't do it, Mom. Not when I saw what I was becoming. Relief washed through me, followed quickly by a renewed sense of betrayal. Even though he hadn't gone through with it, the fact that he had contemplated such manipulation, that he had taken steps toward it, revealed a darker side of my son than I had ever wanted to acknowledge. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, withdrawing my hand from his. Because I want to make things right, he said simply. Because I can't rebuild our relationship on a foundation of lies and manipulation. Because I'm trying to be better than the man who would steal from his own mother. His honesty, painful as it was, represented a step toward genuine reconciliation that our polite lunches and careful conversations had not. This was Daniel stripping away pretense, taking responsibility in a way that offered at least the possibility of redemption. I don't know what to say, I admitted. You don't have to say anything right now, Daniel replied. I just needed you to know the truth. All of it. He stood, straightening his tie. I should go. You need time to process this. And I have a meeting with a realtor about finding a new place. You're moving? I asked, also rising. He nodded. The condo was Lauren's choice, not mine. Too many memories now, anyway. He hesitated at the door. For what it's worth, Mom. Seeing you these past months, how you've built this new life, how you haven't let bitterness consume you even after what I did, it's changed how I think. About everything. About what kind of man I want to be. After he left, I sat motionless at my desk, trying to integrate this new information into my understanding of my son, my past, and my future. The revelation of his near betrayal hurt deeply, but his confession also represented a kind of breakthrough, an honesty between us that had been missing for longer than I cared to admit. My office phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Christopher's name appeared on the display. Hi, I answered, trying to keep the emotional turmoil from my voice. Linda? Is everything okay? Of course he could hear it anyway. In the months since the storm, Christopher had developed an almost uncanny ability to detect my moods. Daniel just left my office, I said. It was intense. Can you meet me for lunch? I'll be there in 20 minutes, he promised without hesitation. Over salads at our favorite cafe near the foundation offices, I recounted Daniel's revelations, the breakup with Lauren, her scheming, and most difficult of all, his admission about the insurance money. Christopher listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly grave. When I finished, he reached across the table to take my hand, his thumb tracing soothing patterns across my knuckles. I'm so sorry, Linda, he said finally. That's a lot to process. I don't know how to feel, I admitted. Angry, certainly. Hurt, but also relieved in a strange way. Like we've finally broken through the polite facade to something real, even if that reality is painful. Christopher nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the most important relationships can only heal once everything is laid bare. No more secrets, no more pretense. His blue eyes held mine. Daniel took a risk telling you the truth. That says something about who he wants to be, even if it also reveals who he almost was. When did you get so wise about parent-child relationships? I asked, attempting a smile despite the heaviness in my chest. I've spent a lot of time watching you navigate yours, he replied, and thinking about what I would want if I had been fortunate enough to have children. He paused. Which brings me to something I've been meaning to discuss with you. The shift in his tone caught my attention. What is it? Christopher glanced around the cafe, then shook his head slightly. Not here? Tonight? Dinner at my place instead of yours? Curiosity mingled with the emotional exhaustion of the morning. Of course. Is everything okay? Everything is wonderful, he assured me with a smile that didn't quite mask a hint of nervousness. I just want a more private setting for this particular conversation. Throughout the afternoon, I found myself distracted from work by two competing thoughts. The painful revelations about Daniel and Lauren, and the mysterious topic Christopher wanted to discuss. By the time I arrived at his penthouse that evening, my nerves were stretched thin from the emotional whiplash. Christopher opened the door wearing an apron over his dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that still made my heart beat faster after all these months. You're cooking? I asked, genuinely surprised. In our time together, we'd either gone out to restaurants or I'd cooked at my place. The kitchen in Christopher's penthouse had always seemed more decorative than functional. Attempting to, at least, he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. I've been taking lessons, secretly. The penthouse smelled of garlic and herbs, and I could see a bottle of wine breathing on the counter, two places set at the dining table with obvious care. Christopher took my coat, kissed me gently, and guided me to a bar stool where I could watch him finish preparing our meal. Chicken piccata, he explained as he returned to the stove. My instructor assures me it's nearly foolproof, but I've proven her wrong at least twice during practice runs. The domesticity of the scene. Christopher, Hale, tech magnate and philanthropist, anxiously watching chicken cutlets sizzle in a pan, was so unexpected and endearing that it momentarily pushed aside the heaviness of the day's revelations. I sipped the wine he poured me and watched him work, his movements careful and deliberate. So, cooking lessons? I observed. Any other secret skills you've been developing that I should know about? He glanced at me with a mysterious smile. A few. Some more successful than others. Dinner was surprisingly delicious. The chicken tender, the sauce bright with lemon and capers, the pasta perfectly al dente. Christopher accepted my compliments with a blend of pride and sheepishness that I found utterly charming. As we finished the last of the wine, he grew more serious. I wanted to talk to you about something I've been considering for a while now, he began, his voice carrying an undertone of nervous energy I rarely heard from him. About the future. Our future. My heart skipped a beat. What about it? Christopher took a deep breath. I've lived a certain way for most of my adult life, focused on building my company, on achieving measurable success. Even my philanthropy has been structured, strategic. He reached across the table for my hand. Then you came back into my life, and suddenly everything I thought I knew about what matters most shifted. Chris, I began, but he shook his head gently. Please let me get this out. He squeezed my fingers. I've been thinking about legacy lately. What we leave behind, what really endures. The foundation is part of that, but it's not enough. His eyes held mine steadily. I want more, Linda. I want a family. With you. The statement hung in the air between us, its implications slowly unfurling in my mind. A family? I repeated, not quite comprehending. Christopher nodded. I know we're not exactly in our prime childbearing years, he acknowledged with a wry smile. But there are children who need homes, who need parents with the resources, stability, and life experience we could offer. His expression grew more serious. I've been researching adoption, particularly older children in the foster system, children who are often overlooked because most couples want babies. I stared at him, speechless. Of all the directions I had imagined this conversation going, this had never occurred to me. You want to adopt? At our age? I finally managed. Is it really so strange? He asked. We're both healthy, financially secure, emotionally stable. We have wisdom that younger parents don't, patience born from experience. His eyes never left mine. And most importantly, we have love to give. Love that's been tested by time and separation and reunion. The idea was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. Parenting again? At 50? Starting over with a child who would carry their own history, their own wounds? But as the initial shock faded, something else bloomed in its place. A recognition of the rightness of it. The perfect symmetry of giving a second chance to a child who needed one, just as life had given me a second chance when I needed it most. You've really thought about this, I said. Not, quite a question. Christopher nodded. I have, but it would need to be a decision we make together. A commitment to building a family neither of us expected to have at this stage of our lives. He smiled gently. I'm not proposing we do this tomorrow, just opening the conversation about what our future might hold. And what about us? I asked, the question that had been hovering unspoken between us for months. Where do we fit into this vision of family? Christopher's smile deepened as he reached into his pocket. I was hoping you'd ask that, he said, placing a small velvet box on the table between us. Linda Carrington, would you consider building that future as my wife? He opened the box to reveal a ring that took my breath away. Not because of its obvious value, though the emerald-cut diamond flanked by smaller stones was undeniably exquisite, but because of what it represented. A commitment I had never expected to find again. A love I had once walked away from being offered to me anew. Oh, Chris, I whispered, tears filling my eyes. Is that a yes? He asked, vulnerability evident beneath his confident exterior. In that moment, my mind flashed to the night of the storm, standing on Daniel's porch, drenched and desperate. Everything I had built over decades washed away in hours. I remembered the despair, the sense of total loss. And then I thought of everything that had emerged from that devastation. A career that filled me with purpose, a home that truly felt mine, a relationship that valued me for exactly who I was, and now this, a proposal not just of marriage, but of a completely unexpected future. Yes, I said, the word emerging with absolute certainty. Yes to all of it, to being your wife, to building a family, to whatever comes next. Christopher slipped the ring onto my finger, then pulled me into his arms. As his lips met mine, I understood with perfect clarity what I had been slowly learning since the storm. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what you never knew you were missing. 1 year to the day after the tornado that had destroyed my home and inadvertently rebuilt my life, I stood in the garden of my Fountain Square house, surveying the final preparations for the afternoon's gathering. White folding chairs formed neat rows on the lawn, a simple arch decorated with autumn flowers marked the focal point, and small tables dotted the perimeter where guests would enjoy cocktails and hors d'oeuvres after the ceremony. My wedding day. At 51, I was about to become a bride again. Not in the grand ballroom where Indianapolis's elite typically celebrated such occasions, but in the backyard of the home where I had found myself after losing everything. "Mom?" Daniel's voice called from the back door. "The flowers just arrived. Where should they go?" He stepped into the garden carrying a box of boutonnieres and corsages, looking handsome and mature in his charcoal suit. The past year had changed him as profoundly as it had changed me. His breakup with Lauren had initiated a period of genuine self-reflection, and our relationship had slowly healed through honest conversations and deliberate effort on both sides. "On the kitchen table, please," I replied, smoothing the skirt of my dress. Not a traditional white gown, but an elegant champagne-colored silk that complemented my complexion and acknowledged the wisdom of my years. "And could you check if Marissa needs help with the place cards?" Daniel nodded, but hesitated before turning back toward the house. "You look beautiful, Mom," he said, sincerely. "Christopher is a lucky man." "Thank you, sweetheart." The compliment warmed me. That means a lot, especially today. As Daniel disappeared inside, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection amid the pre-wedding bustle. The past year had been one of profound transformation, not just in my circumstances, but in who I was at my core. Executive Director Linda Carrington was more confident, more assertive, more willing to claim space in the world than the accommodating secretary I had been before the storm. The foundation had flourished under my leadership, expanding to serve schools across Indiana with technology access programs, mentorship initiatives, and scholarships. Christopher and I had developed a rhythm of partnership that extended from our personal life to our professional collaboration, each of us bringing different strengths to our shared vision. And today, we would formalize that partnership in front of the people who mattered most to us. Nervous? Susan appeared beside me, elegant in her role as my matron of honor. Our friendship had deepened over the past year, surviving my transition from colleague to something she still jokingly called my boss's wife. Oddly, no, I admitted. Just grateful for everything that led to this moment, even the painful parts. Susan squeezed my hand. "If anyone deserves this happiness, it's you, Linda." Guests began arriving shortly after. A carefully curated blend of Christopher's business associates, foundation colleagues, my old friends, and the few family members we both had left. I watched from the kitchen window as they were seated, Christopher moving among them with his characteristic ease, dressed in a suit that managed to look both formal and perfectly at home in the garden setting. "It's time, Mom," Daniel said softly from behind me. I turned to find him holding out his arm, ready to walk me down the aisle as we had discussed. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of us. My son, who had once turned me away in my moment of need, now formally giving his blessing to this new chapter in my life. "Before we go out there," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I want you to know something. Dad would be happy for you. Really happy." Tears pricked at my eyes. "You think so?" Daniel nodded. "He always said you were the strongest person he knew, that you deserved the world, even when we couldn't give it to you." He swallowed hard. "I think he'd like Christopher, and I know he'd be proud of the woman you've become since everything." His words were the final piece falling into place. Permission from the past to fully embrace the future. I blinked back tears, not wanting to ruin the subtle makeup Susan had helped me apply. "Thank you," I whispered, squeezing his arm. "I'm ready now." The simple ceremony unfolded beneath the golden afternoon light, autumn leaves occasionally drifting down around us like nature's own confetti. Christopher's eyes never left mine as we exchanged vows we had written ourselves, promises not of blind devotion or unrealistic forever, but of partnership, respect, and the wisdom to treasure every day we were granted together. "When I was 17, Christopher said, his voice carrying clearly to our assembled guests, "I made a promise to Linda under the bleachers at our high school. I promised I would never let her stand alone." His smile was both tender and triumphant. "It took 30 years, a tornado, and more than a few twists of fate, but I'm finally keeping that promise today." When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the applause from our guests seemed to echo the approval of the universe itself, a benediction on a union that had defied time, separation, and conventional expectations. The reception flowed naturally from the ceremony, guests mingling in the garden as servers circulated with champagne, and the catering staff transformed the ceremony space into an intimate dinner setting. I found myself moving from conversation to conversation in a happy daze, Christopher's hand often finding the small of my back as we navigated the celebration together. Mrs. Hale, he murmured at one point, testing the name with obvious pleasure. How does it feel? Like coming home, I replied honestly. Like finding a place I didn't know I was looking for. As twilight descended, cafe. Lights strung through the garden trees illuminated our first dance, not to a traditional wedding song, but to the Bruce Springsteen ballad that had been playing the first time Christopher kissed me at 17. The symbolism wasn't lost on our guests, who watched with indulgent smiles as we swayed together, bridging the decades between then and now. When the music changed, Daniel approached, extending his hand. May I? He asked Christopher, who stepped back with a gracious nod. Dancing with my son, I was struck by how much had healed between us in the year since the storm. I never thought we'd be here, Daniel admitted as we moved across the makeshift dance floor. After what happened that night, I was afraid I'd lost you forever. Family is complicated, I replied, echoing words Christopher had said to me during one of our early conversations about Daniel. But when there's love underneath the mess, there's always a way back. I'm trying to be worthy of that, Daniel said seriously. Of your forgiveness, your example. I studied his face, so like his father's, yet uniquely his own, now bearing the subtle marks of hard-won maturity. You already are, I assured him. We're both works in progress, Daniel. The important thing is that we're progressing together. Later, as dinner wound down and guests lingered over coffee and dessert, Christopher clinked his glass for attention. The conversations quieted as all eyes turned toward my new husband. Linda and I want to thank you all for sharing this day with us, he began, his hand finding mine. Your presence means more than you know, especially since we have one more piece of news to share. A ripple of curiosity moved through the gathering. We had planned this moment carefully, deciding that our wedding was the perfect occasion to announce the next chapter in our unconventional journey. 3 weeks ago, Christopher continued, we received confirmation that our adoption application has been approved. Murmurs of surprise gave way to smiles of delight as he went on. Next month, we'll be welcoming 12-year-old twins, Zoe and Ethan, into our family. They've been in foster care for 4 years and have had a difficult journey. But we're ready, more than ready, to give them the stability, love, and opportunities they deserve. The announcement was met with applause and a few happy tears from guests who understood the significance of this decision. At 51 and 53, Christopher and I were embarking on parenthood together. Not a replay of my earlier experience as a young, struggling single mother, but a deliberate choice made from positions of security, wisdom, and abundance. Daniel was the first to raise his glass in toast. To my mother and Christopher, he said, his voice steady and sincere. And to Zoe and Ethan, who have no idea how lucky they are to be joining this family. As glasses clinked and congratulations flowed, I found myself momentarily overwhelmed by the fullness of the moment. Surrounded by love, poised on the threshold of a future I could never have imagined on that rain-soaked night when I stood rejected on my son's doorstep. Are you okay? Christopher asked, quietly, noticing my emotional state. Better than okay, I assured him, just taking it all in, the sheer improbability of where we are right now. He nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. From devastation to celebration in 1 year. It's quite a journey. And we're just getting started, I reminded him, thinking of the children who would soon bring new energy, new challenges, and new joy to our lives. As the evening progressed and guests gradually departed with warm embraces and good wishes, the garden grew quieter. Eventually, only Daniel remained, helping the catering staff with final cleanup despite my protests that it was unnecessary. I insist, he said firmly. It's the least I can do. He hesitated, then added, I'm proud of you, Mom, for rebuilding your life, for giving those kids a chance, for not letting bitterness win after everything. His acknowledgement of the past and celebration of the present formed a perfect bridge between who we had been and who we were becoming. I'm proud of you too, I told him. More than you know. After Daniel left and the house fell silent, Christopher and I stood together on the porch, looking out at the garden where strings of light still glowed among the trees. Tomorrow we would leave for a brief honeymoon in Napa Valley, returning just in time to prepare the house for Zoe and Ethan's arrival. Life was about to change again, profoundly and permanently. What are you thinking? Christopher asked, his arm around my waist. About storms, I replied honestly. About how they destroy and clear and make way for rebuilding. Philosophical on our wedding night, he teased gently. But I know what you mean. If not for that tornado, we might never have found our way back to each other, I finished. I might never have discovered who I could be beyond Daniel's mother or Parker and Associates' secretary. The storm just created the opening, Christopher corrected. You did the hard work of walking through it, of building something new from the wreckage. I turned in his arms to face him fully, the man who had appeared in my darkest hour and helped me find the light. We built it together, I said, and we're going to keep building. For ourselves, for Zoe and Ethan, for all the children the foundation reaches. Christopher leaned down to kiss me, a kiss that held both passion and promise. 3 words, he murmured against my lips, echoing the moment from a year ago that had changed everything. But instead of "she raised you," the rebuke that had shaken Daniel's complacency, he offered a different truth, simple and profound. You are enough. And I was. Finally. Completely. Joyfully enough. Not just as a mother or a wife or an executive director, but as Linda. The storm had taken my house, but it had given me a home within myself that no disaster could ever destroy. As Christopher and I moved inside to begin our first night as husband and wife, I carried that knowledge with me like a talisman. From the darkest moments can come the brightest beginnings. From total loss can come the most complete finding. From rejection can come the most profound acceptance. From storm to sanctuary. From endings to beginnings. From despair to hope. That was the story of my unplanned second chance, a chance I had seized with both hands and would never take for granted again.